Welcome to The Real Bottom Line, the podcasts for entrepreneurs featuring entrepreneurs. Today, my guest is Andrea Sampson of the Talk Boutique, and I'm super excited to talk about all things communication with you today. Welcome.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm so excited to be here with you.
It is a thrill. I love obviously you're a storyteller and you help a lot of people with that messaging piece and communication. How did you get into being this skill set, and what attracted you to it?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. And my background, I have a very eclectic background. I was one of those kids who came out of school and didn't really know what I was going to do. In fact, I didn't even graduate. I left high school in grade 10. I went and became a secretary for a couple of years, and then came back to university as a mature student at 21, if you can believe it. Did a couple of years in university, and then made the decision to move to Toronto. I was originally from the East Coast, like you. And so I arrived in the big city, with all my worldly belongings, and decided to create a career for myself. And that career started in fundraising.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I was a fundraiser for a number of years, and what happened for me, there were a couple of key points in my own evolution as as a human and as a career person. I was in fundraising, and I loved being in the not-for-profit world, but it was very difficult to make money, and it was very difficult to actually create an impact because you never had enough money to do
Mm,
the work that really needed to be done.
yeah.
And I left that world and went into the service provider world. And in those days, it was contract call centers. I was working on, all the inbound and outbound for all the major telcos. We were the largest contract telco in the country at the time. And I learned this whole world of sales, but also technology, because call centers are highly technology driven. And this was in the 90s,
Mhm.
and so there was a lot of technology that was emerging. And from that, I knew that that was not my final destination. It was not something I
It wasn't your
really
passion
enjoyed.
to help
No,
others?
but what it did for me was it opened my eyes to what's possible. And living in an always on world 24/7, it showed me that the consumer is always the one who's driving the conversation, right? And so I left that world when I had my daughter, and I didn't want to be in that kind of stressful environment. And so I made the shift to advertising.
Okay.
One might say, well, frying pan fire, not sure.
What's the
But
through line there?
yeah, and I went into the advertising world and found a niche for myself that I again didn't know that I had. I'd had a lot of experiences up until that point, and I walk into this world having come out of the not-for-profit world, having come out of the service provider world, and suddenly I find myself in a world of storytelling, in a world of large budgets and lots of talk of strategy and what is it we're doing and consumer insights. And I suddenly found that all everything I had been doing up until that point led me to there. I had so much knowledge I didn't even know I had. And I remember the first 6 months that I was in advertising, it was like I was learning. It was like I was fluent in one language and I was learning another language and finding all the corollaries. Oh, this means that. Oh, this means that.
Mhm.
And so suddenly, all the work that I had done in the not for profit world, in the technology world through call centers, translated into marketing and advertising. And I had this vast, deep well of knowledge that I didn't even know I had, and no one around me had. And that first
Mhm.
year in advertising, I was promoted 3 times.
Wow.
Um, and shocking to me. I
Mhm.
was a new mom. My daughter at the time was under a year, and here I am in this big world of advertising where I've got this, young girl from from the East Coast, and suddenly here I am in this, seemingly big world, and I know what I'm doing. And I spent almost 25 years in advertising, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And coming in from the not-for-profit world, what it did for me was it gave me this sense of purpose and wanting to create impact. And so as I came into advertising, I came in with this, maybe some would say naive, some would say idealistic, but this view that I could create or impact the social narrative through this very, very powerful medium. And I spent a lot of my career actually doing just that, looking at all the ads we were doing, and recognizing the voices of women as an example. When I came in, the voices of women were not being heard. And so I made it my mandate, if I could do little things within, it was like, well, let's have more women. Let's make sure we've got more people of color. Let's make sure that, so I did small things to create whatever impact I could. But there came a point where I was like, you know, not only am I done, but my idealism is getting in the way, quite frankly. And I realized I was an idealist in a capitalist world, and it was time for me to make a shift. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was a senior vice president of strategy for a very large agency here in Canada, and I just started sort of reaching out. I knew I didn't really want to go back into advertising. I could have gotten another job in another agency. That really wasn't an issue. But it was that I wanted to make impact. I wanted to do something. And so I ended up getting hired by TEDx Toronto.
Mm,
And at the time, I had, it was the early days of the TEDx movement. TEDx Toronto was one of the very first TEDx's to be awarded a license, and at the time, it was one of the largest in the world. And I was hired as a speakers coach, not even knowing what a speakers coach was, had never heard of it. But at this point in my career in advertising, basically my entire job was presenting and
right.
storytelling. But here's the thing, I was doing a lot of storytelling, never understanding or having been taught the basics of story. And when I went into the TED world, it opened my eyes, because what I found were two things. One, I had, again, a skill I didn't know I had in the agency world. A big part of what we do, or what I was doing, because I was in strategy, was I would have to take large swatches of data. Like, I'd have to understand a lot about a lot. And then I would have to bring it down to what we called core consumer insights, why we make the buying decisions we make. And that would become the underpinning for the creative campaigns that we would put into the market. So my job was to give them all the boring strategy stuff. And then the creative people would take that boring sort of, research that we would bring in a very concise way, and they would build on top of it the beautiful ad campaigns that you would see in market. Well, that was the exact skill that was needed by TED speakers. Because if you think about it, here I'm working with scientists and academics and technologists and artists, people who have spent their whole life doing the thing they're doing. And now they're tasked with turning that into a 15-minute TED talk, right? And so here I had this skill I didn't know I had. And the second thing was that storytelling, even though I had been doing it for years, I really had never been taught. And I was a good storyteller, but I wasn't a great storyteller. And so the TED world taught me how to become a great storyteller. So that's a long answer to your short question, but
Well, no, and there's a couple places I want to revisit and then dig down, because when you talk about consumer insight and synthesizing data and things, I feel like even when I think of myself with financial concepts or strategies and things like that, is my biggest thing is how do I take what's important and bring it down to something that's simple, language they can action on, and also understand what it's doing, right? Without
Mhm.
with the level of detail they want. And so I'm struck by how hard it must have been to tell a story in a 30-second commercial,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the thing about advertising, when you are doing storytelling and advertising, so much of it is about finding concepts, right? You're always looking for what is the transformation or the change that you're trying to create, right? So there's a mechanism, there's an underpinning to it. So is it a transformation? Is it a revolution? Is it a is it a an extension? Okay, so when you're storytelling, and this I absolutely did learn in advertising, and I use it to this day, is always understanding what is it we're asking the listener to do. Not specifically in this product, buy this product, but really what is it we're saying that this product will do so that the listener's life changes? So, is it, get this credit card and you will have freedom,
Right.
go on that trip, right? So what is that? That is actually stepping into a new you. That is seeing yourself. There's a transformative aspect of that. So your storytelling has to support that basic underpinning of the mechanism.
Yeah.
And so you're always thinking about what is it you want the story to do, and then what's the best story to be able to do that. And, in advertising, we use a lot of made up things. But when I'm working with speakers, it's your life,
Right.
right? We all have these moments. Like, if I were to say to you, Wendy, when's a time in your life that you transformed, that you can remember, you can go back to you and go, oh my God, when that thing happened, I was a different person. You find that moment, right? And we all have them, and we have many of them throughout our life. Sometimes they're huge and sometimes they're small, but we all have them.
Yeah.
And so when we find them, then we can we can take that story and go, okay, now what is it you want the listener to do as a result of your talk?
Mm.
What is the core idea you're trying to get out there to them? And therefore, what is it that you want them to take away? Now, let's take your story and let's build it around that idea and giving the emotion of transformation through that story. So the listener is tracking with you. And storytelling is so powerful because when you're telling your story, I'm hearing my story,
Yeah.
right? Because our brains do this. This is scientifically proven that, our brains, when we're listening to stories, engage in a different way. They engage sensorially.
Mm.
And what it does is it brings up our own memories. So you're telling me your story, but I'm seeing myself in your story.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a time in my life when that happened. And then we start to align. Our brain literally aligns. And so it's such a cool thing with storytelling that we don't really realize, but that's why it makes us feel good.
Mm. I do hear the word story a lot. How would you define a story? Like, how would we even know, hey, this is what a true story is? Is there some
Well,
aspects of the communication that makes it a story?
It's it's funny. I get asked this question by a lot of like scientists and academics because
Mm.
story is trained out of them, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so, what is a story? A story is a series of events that lead to a conclusion. That's
Okay.
all a story is, right?
Yep.
The way you tell a story is what makes it interesting or not. A story could be, I woke up, I had breakfast, I went on a podcast with Wendy, and then I went to bed.
And my
That's a
life was
story,
complete.
and my life was complete, and that's a story. It's not a
Yeah.
very good story,
No.
right?
Yeah.
It's not very interesting, but I could tell that story through the lens, like, so I could build that story in such a way. So, like, if we decided that, what are we trying to show with our story?
Mhm.
So let's start there. Let's not start with the story.
Yeah.
Let's go, what's the idea?
Right.
Right? Maybe the idea is conveying complex information so that people understand it and action it. Because
Mm.
when the information that we're providing is understood, we actually are contributing to a different future, right? We're co-creating a future together.
Yeah.
And that's actually that's my why. That's why I do what I do. And so if that's why I'm telling this story, then I could start off that story and say, this morning I got up, and it was a morning like any other morning. I was up early and I spent some time just in front of, sitting in my living room looking out at the gently falling snow with my fireplace roaring. And it was beautiful. It was quiet, and I was able to meditate and really find some time. And my cats were there and they were playing, and it was a really lovely morning of just being quiet and still. I knew I had a podcast that I had to be on, and so I wanted to make sure I was ready for that. And in doing that, I, got myself ready and made sure that I looked okay and did all the stuff that I typically do when I'm going to be on a podcast. And then I went to jump onto the link and to realize I actually didn't have the link. It was buried in my email and I couldn't find it in the moment. And suddenly this morning that was very quiet and
Oh,
still became frantic. And then when I found the link, for whatever reason, technology, which is difficult, decided to give us some challenges and wouldn't let me into the link. And my anxiety started to rise. But I remembered that I actually know what I'm doing, and I remembered that the person, Wendy, who I'm gonna be, speaking with is kind and is understanding, and I didn't really have to worry about that because I knew that the message that I was gonna be conveying was an important message. I knew that that message was gonna help people to find their own message, to find their idea, and so all I really needed to do was to focus on being me, to
mm,
ground, to center, to be here and be present so that my important idea, that your information is needed in the world because we co-create a future together.
yeah.
And so as I came in, rather than being frazzled and stressed, I just stayed focused on my own message. And so I showed up being the person I am and open to all of the wisdom that I was going to learn from Wendy along the way. So, same story,
Same story.
right?
Yeah. I was mesmerized. I could listen to you talk all day, Andrea. I love that. As an entrepreneur, I feel like storytelling is like integral to a lot of our success, but that I don't know that we understand that all of us understand that. And so, for the entrepreneurs, where do we use story, and why is it important?
So first of all, as entrepreneurs, actually, let me even take a further step
Yep.
back. As business people,
Yes.
every business that we run, everything that we do is a story.
Hmm.
In fact, a corporation, when we incorporate a business, is the legalization of that story, right? Sapiens, Yuval Harari. At the beginning, I think it's either of Sapiens or Homo Deus, talks about that we believe so deeply in our stories that we have created these legal entities called companies that live beyond the people who created them, right? So
Yes.
there is a legalization that says the business you are creating is a legal story that now has legal rights. So stories are the basis of the businesses that we run. So that's the first thing. But in that, do you know the story of your business?
Right.
Have you crafted it? Have you been, really intentional in the story you want others to hear about the business you've created?
Hmm.
And so, understanding what it is that your story is, that business. So, when we are defining a story, as you heard, the first thing we're doing is going to what's the idea, and that idea is comprised of a what, a how, and a why, and the what is really the category. So if you think of your business, what category are you in? What's the topic, the category? The So for you, as an example, you work in financial services, right?
Hmm.
And so that could be your category, but you could also be in a category of maybe freedom, like, because you could define it differently, so you would decide that. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it's financial services. Your how, that is the way in which you address the what. So, what is it that you or your business does differently than others in that category? How do you uniquely define who you are? And so, it could be that you have a focus on helping, creative people find their value. That might be a how, and there might be a bit more in there. And then there's a why. The why is the impact that the what and the how have in the world. What's the outcome, the result, or the impact of that what and how together? So that forms the underpinning. And for many companies, that's really the underpinning of the vision or the mission or the two together,
Yeah,
right?
I guess I was going to say, within that framework you just talked about, where do mission and vision fit?
Yeah.
Or are these how we answer those questions to develop those statements?
It's a bit of both. Like, what you're really doing at a very core level is you're developing the value proposition first, which seems a little odd because if you work with business strategists, they'll always say, have your vision and mission. Yes. And for so many of us, our vision and mission comes from the thing that we offer to the world, right? And so sometimes it's actually easier to go through the value proposition. So I always go there and then we go to the higher order. Okay, now what's the vision? What's the mission? And so that's, again, it's not fully the value proposition, but it is really, you're digging into your value proposition as a business, defining it. Then you're going, okay, now what's the why? That starts to become parts of the vision, right?
Mm,
The what, that becomes parts of your mission. How do you do it?
yeah.
What are the things that you put out in the market? So all of that becomes your vision and mission, and that to some degree is your story. But you have to build it as a story, because if it's a vision and mission, it's kind of boring. It lives somewhere.
On a
You don't
wall,
really,
on a website tab.
yeah, on a website tab that maybe somebody sees, maybe they don't. But how do you action it? We do a program called Story Finding, which is a really interesting program where we work with organizations to find their brand story.
Mm,
And it borrows heavily from my brand strategy background. So I was a
yeah.
as I spent many years in brand strategy, and we use some. It's not a branding exercise, but it borrows heavily on it. We just did this with an organization who's in the process of changing their name, large global organization,
Yeah.
undergoing a very massive change. And so they were going into the branding part of it. And I said, you might want to consider building your brand story before you do your brand, because what that will do is it'll give you,
Inform.
yeah, it gives you and it allows you to create alignment as you're going through this process, because
Mhm.
you don't build your story, um, but from the senior executive. You bring your clients into it, you bring your customers, you bring your employees, and we build it together. And so that's what we did. We built this brand story. And we do research, so we do some stakeholder interviews. We kind of went through a bunch of different processes on it, and we came to the output of a story. And what was so interesting about it was there was a lot of dissension through that
Ooh,
process,
yeah.
because as a company changes its name,
Mm,
like, think about that,
huge.
right? Like, you've got employees who have been employees of that company for 50, 25 years, 30 years,
Yeah.
because this is a company that's been around for a very long time, and they're very married not only to the name, but to what that name stands for.
Right.
Right. And when you change your name, you're not just changing a brand, you're changing, actually, you're expanding often what it is you do. And in this case, that's what they were doing. And so there was a lot of fear
Mm,
and discomfort around, first of all, is this right? What are we doing? I believe in the company that I work for, and now you're changing my company.
yeah.
Where do I fit?
So it's
Right.
almost like, how do you write a news story, but allow these people to see
Honor.
themselves in the news story, yeah, to reflect some of the old
Yeah.
elements of the story.
You have to honor the old story while you adopt a new story.
Mm,
And so through the process, we brought a lot, like everything from the boards of directors to, leaders within the organization, frontline workers. And it was interesting when we came to the final story, which we wrote as a manifesto,
ooh,
an overarching, like, employee, sort of like, here's who I am now,
right.
and all the way to their vision, mission, and values. Like, we rewrote everything. And what we did at the very end of that process is we developed um, a launch video that was meant not to ever be used, but only as an internal piece that would be shown to the employees so they could imagine themselves in this new world.
Right.
And it was fantastic, because it was like, when you have a story, to your point, like the tabs on a website, you go, what do you do with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you hear it like, and this actually may take us into some of the other things we wanted to talk about, which was AI. we actually used AI to build that story. So we had done a lot of work,
Yeah.
and through the process of it, I started working with a lot of different generative AI tools to help me in my thinking, refine my thinking. So, when you do this kind of work, so much of it is colored by the research. Now, qualitative research, it's not like quantitative where you've got numbers, right?
Yeah.
Qualitative is people talking. So I was using AI, generative AI, to do some analysis for me. Keywords. Go look at all of the transcripts of all the stakeholder interviews and tell me what words came up often. So that helped me to go, oh, isn't that interesting? Sentiment analysis, right? So I was using generative AI to help me analyze what would normally have been just a human analysis of looking at it and starting to make some recommendations. But now I'm working with an AI.
Do you think that eliminated maybe some of the data processor bias? Like if
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like I might have really liked this word, so I see it more often. Like when I bought my Jeep, all of a sudden I see Jeeps everywhere. Where,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes, it absolutely did, and what was fascinating about it is as I did each process, it then spurred more questions for me. Questions I wouldn't have had without the processing using generative AI, and also that I wouldn't have been able to answer because you're going deep into qualitative data, which is very difficult. I mean, I've done it for many years. I know how to do qualitative analysis, but at some point you are limited by your own ability to synthesize this stuff.
right,
And so, and often you do it with groups of people. That's time consuming, and we were doing this quickly, and it was phenomenal. But at the end of it, as I went through it all, wrote the story, I gave the story that we had created back to generative AI, and I said, "Give me a storyboard for a launch video for this new product, this new company name." And it was phenomenal. I mean, it literally spit out something that with just a few tweaks we were able to take. And then I worked with some of my own team who also works with generative AI, and we used AI to create the video. Everything from the visuals that we used within it to the voice that voiced over on it.
gosh,
And the client didn't know we were doing this. This was a bit of a value add that we gave. And it was such an interesting thing because, I was talking to them yesterday, we were doing our debrief, and they, the first thing they said was that video, that first of all, that was a surprise. And secondly, we could literally put our new logo on it and use it. They were like, it was that effective. And so it gave them a tool. And this is what story does. So coming back to the question around story, is it gave them the story of who they were becoming. And it aligned them. Suddenly they could see themselves. They weren't losing,
right,
they were gaining. Everything that they had done was a foundation for where they were going.
right.
And because when you're in the midst of massive change like that, it's really easy to believe that everything that you hold dear is going to get thrown away or devalued,
Mm,
which is not true because that's actually, if you did that, you wouldn't have that organ. It's like, it would be like us, let's say that there's a major life change. Let's say you're getting married, or let's say you're having a child. And, in that transformation, you're going to throw out that person who was there before
mhm,
to become this new person, right? Well, of course you wouldn't do that. I mean, the person who you're marrying is marrying you because of who you were before you were married, not because of who you become after you're married, right?
right.
And so, but when we are in change as humans, we don't like change.
Mhm,
And because we don't like change, we go immediately to the worst case scenario. And in organizations, if your vision and your story is not clear, that is the biggest risk you have as a business owner, because now you're going to lose your employees because they're going to start filling in the blanks for you.
right. Um, wow, I feel like I could talk to you for about 4 hours, but I kind of want to unpack just a little bit. And so, with regards to story, I feel like the way you're talking about a lot of different processes, and that's building your brand and building your vision mission, is kind of reversing the process and start with your story and your why first, and build on it, as opposed to starting with those kind of definitive things that drive everything. Let the story drive it all.
Yes. Well, the thing is, it is you,
Yeah.
right? So when you understand that your business is a story, and because it's a story, you need to keep building that story, being consistent with that story, maybe adding new chapters to that
Yeah.
story, right? But it all has to, like you're not suddenly bolting on, if you're telling this, if your story is Lord of the Rings, you're not, Luke Skywalker's not showing up one day,
Yeah.
right? So you've got to be true to Lord of the Rings. You might be talking about a new elf that we never heard about, or you might be going to a new land that maybe we heard about but never explored. But you wouldn't be outside of that story, and that is it. It's the thing that's the hardest, because I can use that example and we all get it really, really quickly,
Mhm.
but it's not so clear for your business.
Yeah.
If you are a financial services company and you decide, as an example, that you're going to get into, the course creation business, right?
Yeah.
You go, well, that makes sense. Sure, I could do courses on financial services. Yes, sure you could. But is your financial services business, is your story, whatever that business is, does it support that? Like, are you a B2B company and suddenly you're doing course products that are aimed at B2C customers? And so suddenly it's like you've confused yourself
Mm.
and your market, right? Where's your focus as a company? And what is it? Like, if your business is all about, helping businesses succeed through understanding their financial now and their financial future, and then you say, and I'm going to teach you as a founder how to look at your own finances, that might be a disconnect.
Mm.
It might not. Like, it depends on your story.
Right.
But what I'm saying is it could be. And that's where you really have to stop and go, did I just put Luke Skywalker into, Lord of the Rings?
Wow. Okay. We have come to our kind of a time limit here today. What haven't I asked you about story and entrepreneurship in your business that you think would be of value to the listeners?
I think one of the biggest things is to see yourself as a business owner, as a storyteller.
Mm.
That is so, we've talked a lot about it. And I think so many people say, well, I'm not a storyteller. Well, first of all, that's not true, because as humans, we are all natural storytellers. Not all of us are good
That's where I
storytellers.
was going to
That's
go
the
with it.
differentiation.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, see yourself as a storyteller. And in seeing yourself as a storyteller, choose to learn to be a good storyteller. Your business depends upon it.
Yeah.
You can learn. Storytelling is something, it is a learned skill. And there are so many resources out there. I mean, yes, we have resources, and I'm happy to give your listeners our corporate storytelling toolkit that we
Nice.
have.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But use our tools, use whatever tools. It doesn't matter where you find it. Find what's right for you. Find what resonates for you,
Yeah.
and learn how to become the storyteller of your business. Because if you're not doing it, then your consumer is creating their own. And do you want to leave it to them to figure out what your brand story is?
Wow. And I think, and Andrea, that is the real bottom line. Thank
Yep.
you so much for your time today. We'll put your contact information in the show notes and all that type of stuff. But I appreciate your time and your sharing of such great knowledge today.
Oh, Wendy, well, thank you for asking such great questions. This has been so much fun. It is my absolute privilege and honor to be here serving you and your listeners. So thank you.
Thank you.